and we're going to record. Oh, look at that. We're ready to record. So I'm going to put this guy back in here and we will do our best. So let's go ahead and get started with our first point here. But as we get started with that, what's some curriculum that you have used before that, let's not be controversial, that you enjoyed at least to a certain extent? Have you used curriculum that you thought was pretty good just to kind of get the ball rolling, that has been helpful for you with teaching, specifically in a church context?
As a teacher to adults, I have never used curriculum.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's available. I know we could probably order whatever we need at the church. I've done book studies, as in topical books, and the ladies are welcome to purchase that if they want to. But the curriculum is based at that point on what they're sharing, what I can find here, of course. And so as far as curriculum guide.
Well, even then, that kind of is curriculum ish, I think, because you're using, you're using a resource that's been available, so we can bend the rules as far as what curriculum is.
In our district, we just finished readers book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was a specific kind of curriculum.
Yeah. It's a tool that you use to kind of jumpstart your discipleship opportunities, that kind of thing. Yeah.
On Wednesday nights over the years, we've used Awana, we've had Olympians before, and the kids retreat, they all have their strengths, all of them you have to supplement.
Yeah.
And then the same thing with Finding Bible Time. I've been in beginners for 150 years. And,
we won't record that part.
Genesis, they all have, I think, their strengths.
Yeah.
But you have to supplement.
And all of them have weaknesses, I've noticed too. It seems to be that way. So yeah.
And it's a good guideline, but
yeah. Right. Yeah.
It's pretty limited.
Yeah, and as we'll see here, I basically have tried to sift through some different kinds of curriculum, and if we have time, we're even going to have like a little small group activity. So we'll try that here. We can hand that back to Pastor Marvin, so he knows what I'm doing up here. And so, but yeah, there's all kinds of different ways to use curriculum. So I'm going to start us off with a few things on the downsides of using curriculum. Now, starting off with a downer, that's not very wise, but I decided to do it anyways. So let's just think through some of the downsides of using a curriculum. So as you mentioned, a lot of different names, Answers in Genesis, Regular Baptist Press, Word of Life, Awana, Betty Lukens, Group Publishing. There's a lot of different names. There's a lot of different companies that produce curriculum. Some is better than others, I would say, and some can be really, really helpful in certain areas. Some are maybe a little bit weaker in certain areas. So here's some downsides of using curriculum that I've kind of compiled. But before we get there, what are some downsides that you would think? Maybe I missed a couple. What would you think are some downsides of using curriculum?
In ours, this person's deciding what part of that scripture is relevant.
Yeah.
So they're leaving out a lot of it that is relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So it's not. Sometimes it takes away from the story, and I think what the scripture's trying to teach us, that they've eliminated the parts they didn't think was important.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the bigger ones as far as the downsides. Rudy, say something.
It encourages you to not think about what you're teaching.
Yeah.
Piggyback on that, temptation just to read it and not study through it on your own.
Yeah. These are all, and I think I've kind of hit on at least some of these things. So here's a few that I've come up with, is that their lessons could be teaching watered down or false doctrine. Let me share a quick little personal story. I'm not going to name the publishing company, and I will not name the church, okay? This is being recorded for the sake of Kim and maybe somebody else randomly. We were at this church, and they had already ordered the VBS curriculum. I wasn't a fan of it at all. And the only thing that I can really kind of get out from that was this one phrase that they kind of said again and again. And it was this: God's love helps us stand strong, which I don't even know what that means. God's love house stand, what is it, what do we mean by that? It's so vague and general, like, how does that actually applicable to a kid's life? What do they know what that means? I don't know what it means, like strong spiritually or like physically strong? Like it wasn't really explained very well, the gospel wasn't really presented in it, which is ironic, and I won't go into why that's ironic, it has to do with the name of the church. Anyways, so unfortunately, if you pick out curriculum that's not well written, and specifically if it's not doctrinally like strong, right? It wasn't that it was teaching heresy necessarily, it was just not teaching enough, and it wasn't teaching clearly, right? It wasn't teaching that you can be saved by works, but it was teaching that your life can be strengthened by God some way, but I'm not really sure what that means, what that looks like. So really bad curriculum, that can be a danger. It's less personalized, right? Because it didn't come straight from the teacher like originally. And so there are, as we kind of talked about, there is some reliance on what others have sifted through, and we'll see how you can try to counteract some of those faults as well. Here's a big one, more so for the crowd of friends that I'm familiar with like youth pastors and others that have, say, gotten seminary trained, and they've learned Greek and Hebrew and all this big stuff, and they're like, well, why would I use materials that somebody else has written? Because I studied the Bible for 6 years for this. Why would I use curriculum? And this is a very, very common argument. It's like, I wouldn't use curriculum. And I think the reason why, and I'll get to this in a second, but basically I think the reason why is because they don't look at curriculum, I think, in the proper way as a tool rather than as like a substitute. Now we'll jump into that in a moment more. Speaking of that, look at that. I didn't even remember that was on my next slide. Their lessons can be used as a substitute for preparation. I'm not expecting you to write all this down, so like there's not a quiz at the end of it, just so you know. But a lot of times, as you were saying, you sometimes don't teach it as efficiently as it should have done. And so, and then the last one is it costs money. Now, it probably doesn't cost you money per se, although it might, I don't know. It does cost a little bit of money to buy curriculum, right? You have to have people who write it, people who edit it, printers, and all that. So it does cost somebody money in the end. So that's a downside of using curriculum. Now, that's all we're talking about today. So I hope you still like curriculum. No, here is a key takeaway, and this is what I really would like to get across: is that curriculum is a tool, and I have that in all caps, not because I'm angry on Facebook, making a political statement. No, curriculum is a tool. It's a tool. That's what it is, and it's not a substitute teacher. So that's the key thought. If you don't remember anything else I said here, that is a really big point. As far as when you use curriculum, I would really highly encourage you to think of it as a tool, not as a substitute teacher, right? I am not handy with anything like a screwdriver. I've used them before, and it'd be very, very difficult to put these things together that you get from like IKEA without any kind of tool. But they put those like Allen wrenches in there or whatever. I don't like that IKEA. It's just anyways. But if you don't have the right tools, it's hard to get things done. But if you don't use tools if you use a hammer to try to get screws in, that doesn't work as well. So I've been told, not that I've tried it, but maybe I haven't. I'm not going to tell you. But curriculum is ultimately a tool for you to use. You're still the teacher. You're the one that has that biblical authority to teach, and you should not use curriculum as a way to cheapen the lesson, the responsibilities for you. It should still be a very high burden for you to teach and to use it as a tool. And I think you can use it if you consider the benefits of using it, right? So here's our next little spot here, the benefits of using curriculum, is that they typically come with multiple resources. Not always, but often. Here's just some, they have the lessons, and sometimes, as we're saying, the Betty Lucas lessons are very, very brief, and so you have to add your own things to it. And there's some benefits to that, actually. But sometimes they have these full manuscripted lessons that you can read word for word. And we don't encourage that. That's not very wise practice, but you could theoretically do that and get across biblically sound material. But a lot of times they have PowerPoints slides, they have handouts, they have recommended activities for the teachers and like games even sometimes, and parent resources as well, right? Can you imagine, now think about this for a second, kind of going back to a lot of my youth pastor buddies out there that really don't like using curriculum. So here are your options. If you like all these resources, you're gonna have to develop that yourself every single week. So now the church is paying you full-time or part-time, depending where you're at, to basically be a graphic art designer and a curriculum editor, and or that's you can do without those things, but I think these are really helpful. And so you have to figure out which one would you rather do. Would you rather invest your time and energy on studying the text itself that you're preaching from or teaching from? Would you rather spend more time in prayer? Would you rather spend more time with the students and their families and connecting with their parents and stuff like that? Or would you rather try to figure out how to create one of these? I mean, it took me like a few hours just to come up with this PowerPoint slide, right? PowerPoints take forever to do, but once you get them done for like, if you're, teaching at a school setting, right? Once you do it for the first year, you can do it next year. Well, but you don't do that, as much when you're teaching the Bible to kids and teenagers. You want to try to introduce these different things, especially if you have different age groups over the time, right? We have 6 different grade levels. Imagine if I did the same the same lessons every single year for those 6 grades. By the time they're like 10th grade, they'll be like memorizing it and really turning things off, right? So I think it's really helpful to have these resources available to you as a way so you don't have to focus on those things that are less important. Speaking of that, because of this, point number two is true. It saves time on less important work, like the graphic design stuff, like typing out materials that are already derived from the lesson, so that you can focus on the more important work, which is the understanding, the teaching, and the applying of the Word of God. And again, because it's a tool, you're not using a substitute teacher for you. It's a tool for you to help you teach better. So that's a point that I'd like to share with you. Here's something that's really great, though, is that over time, we do need new teachers to come in. And like in our teen group, we've had people that have not really taught a lot before in children's groups, right? They may have taught a little bit before. Maybe they taught maybe they taught math and science in school, but they never taught the Bible. So it's a little bit of a different kind of way to teach. And so it does help a lot with training new teachers if you have all these resources there. Because if let's say that Jordan is actually Aaron Lawn. Let's say that I'm talking to Aaron. I said, Aaron, we're going to have you teach we're going to have you teach children's church on Sunday. And you would be like, huh? And I'd be like, so we're teaching on Jonah. And that's it. and that's all there is to it. Well, it would be really helpful if I say, so Aaron, we're teaching on Jonah chapter 3. Here's a lesson with all these different resources. Now, it is your lesson, and we can guide you through it, but that resource is really, really helpful. And probably with a brand new first-time teacher, they're going to mimic the lesson that is right now a little bit too much, probably just because they're getting used to it. But over time, we're hoping that it becomes more individualized to them using their gifts and abilities to teach others. So it really does help with new teachers. Otherwise, you're just kind of stuck with the teachers that are already there. It's hard to building new teachers. It's a skill that you need to develop. And then finally, well-written curriculum can have a good lesson become a great lesson. And I'll use an example here for that, just to kind of get the point across. And that was my experience over in Florida this past year, helping write curriculum for Word of Life. Now, when Michael Kilbride first mentioned to me, it was like, maybe you should consider becoming a Word of Life curriculum. I'm like, I never even thought of that about the people that did that. It was off my radar, but I like to write. I really do. I like to teach, and I love studying the Bible in depth and all those things. So I did my trial lesson. They had me come on board, and then I was thinking, okay, so 4 lessons, that doesn't take that long. That's funny. So anyways, here's our crew here. We worked on smaller teams within like a bigger team. So it was Michael Kilbride. This is me, in case you didn't know. And here's a guy, his name is Rick Thompson. He's out in Ohio. He's well connected with ABC. Do you know the Thompson name in Appalachian? Apparently his dad is pretty big connected in the area of ABC sports back. He went to ABC. No. Anyways, and then over there is the rest of the team with some of the editors and some of the other writers and such. So my experience there that I had is that I was given the task of writing 4 lessons, and I'm not joking. The actual series is called Tough Topics. I wasn't saying it was hard. It was actually called Tough Topics. And so I wrote topical lessons: finances, violence, temptation, and emotion. These were not specifically like contoured to to me personally. They were just just in case you're wondering. Anyways, these were 4 lessons that were kind of unique, and they were a lot of fun to write. And here's the whole process, just to give you an idea as far as how much work is put into curriculum, at least from one company. We were given about 8 months to prepare for 4 different lessons that I wrote, 4 drafts. And I spent about 8 to 10 hours per draft. And I felt pretty good about that. I'm like, these are some solid lessons. These are some of my best work here. Michael even went through like 1 edit, sometimes even 2 edits before we even came to Florida. I'm thinking, so like, what are we gonna do there? We're gonna like be at the pool and watch the alligators? Or so we go there for a full week. This was back in February, and we spent 75 hours of editing. The first day was hard. So we got up early. We started writing it in our sub team there, and there's another person that was zoomed in. They weren't able to come down for that week, but they came on Zoom. And so we spent so really early in the morning to really late at night. Actually, it was into the next night before I went to sleep. So basically editing with just a few breaks, and we spent 75 hours of just editing this stuff. That was a lot. So when you combine the numbers, after we're doing that, we're still not done. We go back home, and then our, like, if you want to call it the sub editor, she went through some of the basic edits of some of the formatting issues so that things are uniform, and also a little bit of other comments. And then I send in my final edits back to her, and then she sends it up to our general editor, and he will eventually get through his own edits. So it's a very rigorous process. I can't say that every curriculum does this. I have no idea. I have no idea what other companies use. But this was very, very rigorous. And so it gave me a much greater appreciation for when I'm using the curriculum, to know that it wasn't like this one guy who was, a youth pastor out in like West Tennessee that was just had, spent 2 hours on a lesson and, sent it off to Word of Life, and they're like, it looks pretty good. No, it's not. It's not that at all. It was really a rigorous process. And so that's not to say that you should just be like, okay, well then I don't need to study now because they already studied for 100 hours. No, again, it is a tool, but it's a very, very well-researched tool, I would suggest. And so we're up to this point here of different types of curriculum-based lesson. That's the number 3. And so these are different. Every curriculum is different that I've used. So like some will just give you like outlines or basic objectives. That's very common in like school-based curriculum. You'll have objectives which you want to try to hit and try to explain and things like that. And they might give you an outline of a passage or something like that. Or if it's a topical lesson, they'll give you should talk about this, and this. Well, that's fine, but you have to add in a lot of your own material. It's a little bit harder for a new teacher to do that. It's pretty easy for most that are well seasoned. The second one is to have like an outline and like brief commentaries kind of thrown in there. That's a little bit more expansive than the first. And then the last one, what we call a manuscript lesson. That's what we wrote for Word of Life. Is a full like word for word manuscript that we actually read aloud as we were editing, and it was partially traumatic because of all the editing that was done. But it was a good experience still. I really love the experience by Wednesday nights. Monday and Tuesday was hard, but Wednesday night I started to get into the swing of it, and it became fun by Thursday.
You're also doing it next year. They
For some reason, I
invited you back.
They invited me back, and I'm gonna be doing a series on Ruth next year, so that's why I wrote my Facebook devotional about Ruth this past Wednesday. Is it's kind of getting started.
That's a good
I was kind of piggybacking off of that. Anyways, so hey, what are the pros and cons of each of these things here? What are some pros and cons of like just this basic outlining objective thing? What would you say? What are some good things about that?
It forces you to produce your own material, make it personal.
Yeah, definitely more personalized. Yeah. And again, I think I alluded earlier, it also means that you have to bring a lot of your material. If you're a new teacher, it's a little harder. What about this? This is a little bit kind of more of a balanced approach, if you will. But any ideas on this one right here as far as what's good and what's maybe not as good about it?
That brings out the personality of the teacher more.
Good.
When you have, as we've outlined, you're doing more of the teaching from this.
Yeah,
brief time.
sure. And
I was just gonna, I like outlining, and sometimes some of the outlines in the curriculum, I don't like it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I'm gonna put my word in.
yeah, you're right.
My 3 P words, that's just
Yeah.
me, but sometimes you need.
Yeah, you're right. And what I've noticed, at least in one particular company that starts with pro and ends with teens, is that what I found is that they're not very uniform. Sometimes they take this approach right here, which is like an outline, and they'll give like commentary notes. But I noticed like some lessons are like really, really long.
Yeah.
And then some of them you can get done in like 5 minutes. And so sometimes they're not uniform. So sometimes it helps to have a manuscript of lesson just for that, because you can like time it out. And like, how many the word count is the same. If they have like a certain number, which we actually did with Curve Life, we actually timed out each part of it and stuff. Of course, the downside of manuscript lessons is that you can be prone to being less preparational in what you do. So there's pros and cons of each. There's not like a right way or wrong way. Getting started to teach though, a curriculum-based lesson, number 4. And we have a question. What's the first thing to do in preparing to teach? What do you think is the first thing to do? Look at that, we got it right. Yes, I would say that the first thing to do is to pray and then to ask God for his guidance. You're like, but they already did that with the curriculum and they already asked God for his guidance. No, because remember, it's a tool and you are the teacher. You're using curriculum as a tool. You're the teacher, so you need to still ask God for guidance. Maybe God will guide you away from the curriculum. And so that is very important. And then what's the second thing to do? What would you say in preparing to teach?
Praise the Lord.
Pray some more. I like that. I think I need to edit out my brief. Pray some more. That's good. Yeah, reading through it's certainly helpful in doing that. Kind of like the general term that I use is to study according to the 2 Timothy 2:15 principles. Now, if you went through Awana, speaking of curriculum, then you know what this verse is saying, right? It's on the next page here of what 2 Timothy 2:15 is. In fact, you have it tacked out for you. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. So that was given to a pastor who was teaching and preaching and explaining things to his own congregation. And so in our own setting, we might have different children's and youth ministry groups and even adult ministry groups as well. 2 Timothy 2:15, we just read that there. But I wanted to go through this verse just a little bit as it kind of applies to how we teach scripture. First, the command from Paul is to study, which this word means to be zealous or to be diligent in it. So again, you have to teach the material that you're presenting, the passage or passages that you're teaching from, that there needs to be diligence there because it is your responsibility. You're the one. God's going to hold you accountable to those things that you teach. That's why in James it actually says not many of you should be teachers. Now, I'm glad that wasn't our theme for this particular conference.
That's terrible.
But we have another key word in here, which is approved. Now, this is very interesting. Notice that when Timothy is to be teaching, that his approval isn't his congregation. It's actually God's approval first and foremost. So approved unto God. So you should study hard so that you can be approved of by God, which is very important because not everybody will ever approve of you. Yes.
Ron and I have been talking recently about our curriculum teaching it. I have to stop. I have to ask myself the question, does this lesson in the curriculum fit our purpose for why we're teaching our kids?
Yeah,
And I'm finding out that some of them, even though I thought it was a very good curriculum, I'm finding out some of the lessons don't fit that purpose.
yeah. And so it's always about using the right tools and things, and curriculum is one tool, but it's one of many tools. And so when we are teaching, ultimately, because sometimes you wonder, like, I don't know if anybody really got anything from that lesson. And as it turns out, sometimes you hear back from people and you're finding out that you actually like that lesson, that actually helped you. Because ultimately, if you're just seeking their approval, then you're not studying according to 2 Timothy 2:15. And so that's what's really what is most important. I've loved the word that Paul uses here. He uses the word workman, which is used in other contexts to describe a laborer in the field. So when Jesus is talking to his disciples, he talks about how the laborers are few, and pray that the Lord would send more into the harvest, right? That same word there from agrates in Greek is the word for laborers, and a workman in the field, not a very, very flashy job, something that requires a lot of diligence, sometimes tiresome. So it means that you do have to put in the work that sometimes is not the most exciting, but it's important. And the last phrase in here, rightly dividing. It's a very unique word that Paul uses. It means to cut a path in a straight direction. So you can do a good job teaching a lesson that would have been helpful for the 45-year-old adults. But if you're teaching a 4-year-old the same thing, well, a 4-year-old doesn't know what dispensationalism means, right? And so you didn't cut a straight path for them. And so it is important to remember that, and at the same time, you also don't want to be like, God's love helps us to stand strong. That's that's not a straight path. What does that mean? So you need to explain what that means. And so it's not like you're bringing them to an open forest and be like, well, just discover for yourself. No, that's not what you want to do. But unfortunately, that is a very modern view of how to teach. Anyways, we have different ways to edit a curriculum-based lesson. Here's some suggestions here. Is that you can use it as an outline and a commentary. This is on the back of the notes there. So you could use it as like an outline or a commentary. This is how I used to take curriculum. I used to just basically look at the outline and be like, okay, I'll kind of go with that, and then kind of do my own thing, and then kind of go back to it afterwards and think, well, that's a helpful point there. Maybe I'll just kind of readjust a few things. So it's sort of like a secondary resource of commentary, largely done separately on my own. The other one is then to take whatever is printed out or typed out and then to kind of edit within it. Again, notice it says to edit, not that you parrot it. So you are still studying, you're still being diligent in that, you're still the teacher. So just to show you a visual of this, here is one of my, oh, that's really small font. But there are things here. This was from one of the lessons that I did. What I would do is I would find out what the lesson was. I would get the digital document. I would type up my own lesson. I would print out, I would just type out the outline down here, go 1, 2, 3, or 4, or whatever. And then I'll come up with my own material. And then lately, I've done something that is a little bit different. And this might cause you to really, this might not do well with some of you. This is very messy. It doesn't look well, but for some people it works. Basically what I've done is I've taken the manuscript of lesson and I've gone and kind of worked through it. And as I've been working through it, I looked at the passages, I studied them my own as well. But I also highlight the points that have come across. And the reason why is because what I found is that if the Bible indeed has one true interpretation that you're trying to find, you're trying to study for your teaching, typically they do a good job of teaching the same material that should be taught because the Bible intended to say something. And so I would highlight when I'm teaching, I'm not looking down. Joshua must have wondered why Achan didn't come clean when he told that. I'm not actually reading that. I'm just kind of highlighting it for myself. This might not work for you in terms of whatever curriculum you use, if it's a CBT curriculum, if it's something else. But it's just been helpful. I added in my own little points down here because I thought they missed a really key teaching on how to explain the whole story of Achan, which is not a very fun story, but it's a very important story. And I thought a passage from Deuteronomy was really kind of helped and explain some things there. So sometimes I would cross things out, I would add a few notes here and there. And when I go through teaching it, I know where the outline is, and I have a general sense as far as what I'm teaching. But I'm using my own words and things like that because I've studied it well in advance. So that's another way to use curriculum. You don't have to do that, but it's just an example to do that. So we have, let's see here. It is 11:07. We have till 15 after, is that right? So we have 8 minutes. So what I have here is different kinds of curriculum. And I don't know if we'll have time for a lot of this, but I was gonna hand this out. If you can kind of like somehow merge into some groups, we have like 4 different materials. This might be a little bit difficult, but we'll let you all take a look at this. Answers in Genesis, materials, and kind of look at our things. You guys can also do the Answers in Genesis crowd. If we're gonna look at that, the 4 over here. Got this, Support of Life, the Kids Go for Buddies, I think, yeah, Go for Buddies. Back there, we can maybe look at, let's not look at group publishing. Let's do CEF. So this is how it handles the fellowship for you guys back there. So why don't you take a look just for a couple of minutes and just kind of browse through and maybe see what are some things that you think are helpful about that curriculum that was printed out. Let's just take like maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes and just kind of see what are some good things in there. What are some things that are like, I don't know about that. I know you're not going to read the actual text of the lesson, but just some of the resources that they have there. You can see some things. Maybe just make some verbal notes among your team there.
So let's go for it.
Yeah, let's go for this.
I'll just go somewhere that we can include here. It's got a list of objectives, it's got some slide rules, it's got a few things you have for a meeting. Introduction, it's got a lessons and applications, it's got a song. Suggestion for a fair time, it's a new question, but snack time, suggested snack. It has a discipleship time, has an activity sheet. There's a memory verse.
Yes, it gives you a, yeah, there's lots to choose from.
So obviously, right?
Yeah, for small children, everything you need. All the word for word.
I'm not going to give you a
Good. But if you have time or over, you have extra activity, you're not filling around trying to figure out what to do. What can I come up with a compromise?
Which most times you kind of roll over the same kind of thing. Also the cheaper visual theology, curriculum that I will be using next year. So just for Sunday school for about 12 months. Take a look at those and see if there's anything.
Okay, so it's got some questions, it's got some definitions. It's got an overview of
We also have this.
I think you would really have to stand on your.
Yes.
It's like a basic outline. Basically, it's an outline. Yeah.
If you have questions on that.
So that's good.
Yeah, so this is just kind of like with the sense of the age group, because the younger kids are, the more I need somebody to lay it all out. What's the activity, what's the song? You know, because that's not much to.
Like, yeah.
I just like, I pick and roll and choose and I like this from this one, I like this from this one, this looks good, yeah.
The scriptures.
All right, I know that was not much time at all, but I just want to give you a brief glimpse of a couple of things there. So yeah, we have different children's ministry curricula is the plural, isn't it? So anyways, the children's ministry work here. I think we had one group that did answers in Genesis. We use that for our Sunday school right now. We never got around to that. We just didn't have enough groups for that, but it's called group publishing. We have Child Evangelism Fellowship, CEF. And we have the Word of Life Gopher Buddies. There's also the Olympians track for kids as well. So there's different age groups and different things there. Who had answers in Genesis? Was it over here? Yeah. Can you just give a quick comment about something you maybe liked or maybe disliked or just saw in particular?
I mean, it's got it broken down into like, the beginning of the lesson and even as far as, prayer or whatever you can pray for. It's got an introductory thing. Then it's got the lesson and it's more scripted.
Yeah.
But I mean, good questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, these are all tools. You can come up with your own questions. You can.
We refer to a specific verse.
Yeah. So it's certainly they're helpful. We did do group CEF, Child Evangelism Fellowship, back over there. Anything in particular about that you thought was?
Well, for that age group, they did, Barbara said they use flashcards a lot, and that makes good visualization, kids learn visually. And all, every page has things on the side here, suggestions for activities, songs,
Yeah.
and so on and so on.
Yeah, one thing with CEF, they're heavily evangelistic. They're used into, hence the name, but definitely more into like using for a lot of missions trips are beneficial for that kind of thing. Maybe wouldn't always do that for like a Sunday school for 52 weeks out of the year, but it can be helpful for like evangelistic outreaches. Word of Life, we had, I think, down here. Anything in particular?
Well, there was a Gopher Buddies, when we looked at it, I mean, for me, it really lays everything out in detail. And, for a small child, that's what I need, because I don't really feel personally gifted at teaching small children. My wife's different, but for me, I would want everything laid out.
And it's on their level, I might add.
Yeah. Yeah. So we just real quickly, there was also the teen ministry. We have pro teens, and that was back here, I think, right? Any quick comments on that?
Protein says it's proteins, I know.
Yeah.
We used it when I was a youth pastor for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's harder than the normal.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. But to me, with any of these, it can become what you make.
Right. Yeah. And that's why they're tools as far as using them for the utmost of your abilities. We have Word of Life in there, just for sake of time. Word of Life team curriculum. Very similar to the kids. They provide a lot of options for you, a lot of things for you to consider to use. You don't have to use everything, but I personally really like it. And this is a new one that I just bought for Sunday school. I bought it back in December for sometime later this year, and it's called Visual Theology. They have a lot of really neat. It's a professional artist that did this graphic, and then he worked in coordination with a guy named Tim Challies, who's a professional. He's like a fairly well-known writer. They put together this curriculum that tries to explain things using infographics and some of these other things that are really helpful. I thought it'd be a neat way to look at how the Bible was developed and how the Bible is arranged and such. So these are all different kinds of curricula, and it's up to you as the teacher to use them as a tool. And so ultimately that it is a tool and it's not a substitute teacher. And so if you have any final thoughts, I think we are right about the end of time here. So, but I'd be glad to kick around any ideas after we're done. But I really love using curriculum. I wasn't sure about it when I first became a youth pastor here, because I'd never used it beforehand, but I really see the benefits of it You don't have to create your own program of all these added resources, but you can use your gifts and abilities to still teach and spend a lot of time focusing on teaching and being zealous for the text and explain these truths to kids and teenagers. So I think it's a really great tool, but it needs to be a tool and not a teacher. So anyways, you're the teacher. Yes.
I have a
Beth?
quick question. What about quarterlies?
Mhm.
You know, for Sunday school quarterly. The church I used to go to, every Sunday school class had a quarterly on that age level. Everybody who wanted everybody teaching the same thing.
Mhm.
I had,
Is it in the past? I think we've had some, right?
I don't know if you want to get that smart going on that.
Okay. Might not- I'm gonna turn, this was, just so you know, the video is still recording, so let's, no. Anyways, but that's good.
They did, that was the thing.